listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
It is the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross alongside our GM here at VSiN, Mark Dominik. Mark, great to be with you here on this Monday. Another exciting week, almost in the books here on a Monday, as we discussed for week number 17. I don't know if it gets much more exciting than what we saw Sunday night in D.C., Landover, Maryland, proper area there, the DMV. But the Commanders get an overtime victory, 30-24 over Atlanta. So Atlanta now is on the outside looking in potentially to get into the postseason. The Commanders clinch their spot in the postseason. You had the number 8 overall pick, Michael Penix, making his second career start against the presumptive rookie of the year here in Jaden Daniels. What do you make of this matchup that played out on prime time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was great. I think we've seen through the whole, week 17, a bunch of great games, right? A bunch of high-scoring shootouts, important games, teams staying in contention, teams falling out of contention in terms of postseason play. But I think this one was interesting because, it was a huge opportunity for Jaden Daniels to kind of continue to show off why he's going to win the hardware of Offensive Rookie of the Year. And he absolutely was spot on in terms of decision-making, in terms of obviously running the football the way he did last night. Even in the overtime, he basically took control of that team and just ran it all the way down the field, threw it in the end zone, and boom, they won while they ate, almost 8 minutes of clock. It was a really impressive performance by him throughout the game. Michael Penix had hot highs and lows, a little bit, second start ever on the road here. Just did not look as strong, I should say, as I expected him to look because he missed some of the opportunities maybe down the field. But still, a good young quarterback. Like, there's so much to be excited about. We talked about this before. This rookie class, paired with the 2020 class, it's almost half the league is a bunch of young quarterbacks right now that are playing really, really well, and that's exciting to see. I think Michael Penix, obviously the sad thing here for Atlanta fans, as we all know, is they lost control. They had a chance at the end of the game maybe to get themselves in a better spot. They obviously did not handle clock management very well at the end of the fourth quarter. Yeah, exactly, where they had the opportunity, to call a timeout, extra throws. They had another timeout where they could have thrown the ball across the middle, even ran the ball or a screen or something to get more yards instead of trying to kick a 56-yarder to win the game. You'd have thought they'd have been in around the 30-yard line just with a couple more plays, and now you're kicking a 46er to win the game and maintain control. Because now the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have that control. They're going to play a New Orleans Saints team that's, the last couple of weeks has got their socks blown off. And now, obviously Atlanta's got to play Carolina, which, both teams should win. But the problem is the Bucs are the hotter team right now, rolling in where, obviously Atlanta made the big decision with Michael Penix to bench Kirk Cousins. Yes, they've won one, they've lost one. I have a hard time thinking they'd be any worse than what they were with Kirk Cousins, and yet I still think they might have won two and now be in a better spot. So I still think it's a decision personnel-wise that they messed up. And then watching the game management, two things that have been really disappointing out of Atlanta, which has cost them what I think will be the postseason. I think the Bucs win this out.
I mean, you know it firsthand because you coached Raheem when he was your coach as the GM of the Buccaneers. For all the experience that Raheem has now had since those Tampa Bay days, and then he went to D.C. with the Redskins, and I had him there, and you know how well-liked Raheem is. He's a very personable guy. The players love him. Then you go and you work for Sean McVay as the defensive coordinator there, get the second opportunity to be a head coach. How inexplicable is it for the experience he now has in the league to not use those timeouts at the end of the first half and then again at the end of the game with your season on the line? As a GM, what's the conversation like with Raheem today?
I think there's multiple things, right? I think this all ties together, and I agree. He's got so much experience, whether it was back in Atlanta, being part of that staff on the other side of the ball, learning the offensive side as a receiver coach, to Sean McVay, to now being back to the head coach. Here's the thing, two things. Number one, there should have been another person in his ear, and I guarantee there has to be another coach that's a game management coach in the box that's kind of talking about what you should do. Number two, this is the Michael Penix factor. Because Michael Penix is a rookie, I think if Kirk Cousins is in that spot, he's thinking, we should call a timeout here. We still got extra. So the veteran quarterback thing, I think really hurt Atlanta right there in that drive, because I think a veteran quarterback would have been, we need to call a timeout here, where Michael Penix is like, I'm not going to do anything until they tell me what to do. Right? So that's the difference I think you saw here. And I think that's really what cost Atlanta the opportunity to win the game, where instead of a 56-yarder that comes short. So It's a disappointment. Coach Morris can learn from it. Don't we love that statement? When you're a fan, you're like, oh, he'll learn from this. Great. That means we lost. But I think in this situation, I think it's more so on the veteran quarterback and the fact that they didn't have anybody in there that's been through this kind of situation. This is all situational football for Michael Penix, and these are new situations he's never seen in the NFL. So he's going to trust the sideline, where a veteran like Kirk, who's been through a decade or plus of football, would know, hey, look, we've got 2 timeouts. That's a play. We're just going to call timeout here. Don't even need the half to see the sideline. We know better. Like, this is what we're going to do because we still have one more timeout at the bank if we get stuck in the middle of the field. So I think that was a big blow to Atlanta Falcons, and it certainly hurt everything about their season. And, the momentum is just going in the wrong direction. They barely, they beat a Giants team who was, struggling 2 weeks ago. And then they come back here and could have put a nail, or at least really shown they belong. Beating the Commanders would have been a huge victory across the board for this football team, let alone keeping them in control for the number 4 seed.
Yeah, it's amazing because they had 40 seconds, 2 timeouts, and good field position. And the first down play is a chunk play to Drake London up there around the 50-yard line. And 13 seconds, inexplicably, tick off the clock from 31 at the end of the play. It's astounding. And when you make the decision, Raheem Morris, Terry Fontenot, to go to the rookie quarterback, the onus is on you on the sideline. Like, to your point, Mark, I can't put this on the kid. Kid's looking over you at the adult to make the decision for him, whereas Kirk is going to know to make the decision. We saw a play out in Chicago, and that got Matt Eberflus fired. I know some people are like, hey, Caleb Williams has got to know to call timeout against the Lions on Thanksgiving Day. But that's when you have youngsters in there. That's why it's really important that the head coach takes command there, right? Because that's why they switched the rule so the head coach could call a timeout from the sideline.
Exactly why they could just switch the rule, to be able to help guide a young player through the different levels of the football field. And you're right. And then not only that, the Washington Commanders, offsides, defensive pass interference. I mean, they're helping to move the ball down the field for them, killing the clock. So if they'd have had that extra time, that's 2 more plays at a minimum. And again, you could throw across the middle. You could have thrown down to the 20-yard line, 25-yard line, and said, hey, look, we got still 5 seconds left. Kick the field goal, go out of here. Huge victory, and everyone is feeling the Michael Penix love today. Everybody's like, wow, look at Michael Penix. He drove him for the game-winning drive, and the Falcons are still in control of their own destiny, and it was like this feel-good moment. Instead, it gets whisked away because they clock management at the end of the game, and they never touch the ball in the second, in the overtime. And just, obviously the Commanders get the ball and march it all the way down the field at their leisure, chewing up tons of clock, and Atlanta looks there and goes, we lost by 6.
I mean, that's the thing. And people lose their jobs over this in front offices and on sidelines for these decisions that are made or not made. To the point about overtime, Mark, I'm sure you know about the competition committee. Were you ever on that committee? And if so, can you get on the committee, please, Mark, and switch the overtime rule? And Mark, I'm one of those people, like, I don't care what they switch it to. I'm not saying the college system is the perfect system. I just know it's better because it's fair, right? That each team in college gets the opportunity to possess the ball. Whatever you do, whether it's a 2-point play, whether it's from the 25-yard line, whether you want to do it from the 50-yard line, it's going to mirror. We're going to have the same opportunity that you have in college. So as long as they could just get to that position A in the NFL and no advent of a tie, I'll accept anything, Mark. Why has that been a sticking point with the competition committee to not switch it? Because they switch it for the playoffs, knowing it's imperfect in the regular season.
Yeah, it's interesting why they switch in the playoffs, telling you exactly the point, right? We've seen teams that just get knocked out in the postseason. You're like, they didn't even get the ball. That doesn't seem fair. The NFL is so concerned about the length of game. I mean, that's a big deal. You saw in the Major League Baseball, they were doing so many things to try to shorten the game because it was just too long of a game, a little too boring. A football, they're always like it was the average game is 3 hours and 27 seconds. The next year, average game is 3 hours and 24 seconds. They're like, hey, we did a great job. We shortened the game down so we can, do whatever. In this kind of situation, it's, put the clock back at 15 minutes in overtime, and both teams get to touch the ball. And the big decision here is if you're going to be the team that gets the ball first, great. But the unique thing is if you go score a touchdown, then the team that gets the ball second turns around and goes, we've got to score touchdowns. So now they get 4 downs because they know they're never going to punt, right? They're just going to go for it. Vice versa,
Right.
you say, hey, look, I'm going to let the other team, I won the toss, but I'm going to let the other team have the ball first. Now I get to see what they did. Did they get a field goal? Okay, I just need to know what that is. So I think it makes the game more interesting. Now, the hard part is going to be is how do you put it in a box with 15 minutes? Because you can't have 10 because as of last night, you see that they almost ate the entire clock up. They only give you 2 minutes, and now you feel like, oh, that's not really right. So if you go back to 15 minutes, both teams get a chance to have the ball, and then if it's a tie at the end of both of them, because, you can have a long drive. If your defense goes out there and lets another team sit on the field for 13 minutes, then you deserve to lose also, right? You deserve to lose. But I think if your defense goes out there and, they get a touchdown, and you got, 5 or 6 minutes to go, that's more than enough time to mount a drive to see what you can do. So I think you'll see a push again, the compensation committee. I was never on it. Usually it's, a couple of executives, a couple coaches, and then it's a lot of people from, Park Avenue, 345 Park Avenue, where the league office is. And it's usually that group. It's Rich McKay is probably the lead person there that's really got to decide if he wants to make change. This has been debated for a while. They've, again, tweaked the postseason the correct way. There's no good reason other than it's the amount of time of the game that they shouldn't tweak it through the whole season.
Yeah, the point of the clock, I'm so glad you brought that up. The disadvantage that you put the team that loses an arbitrary coin flip, not only do you possibly never get your offense on the field, we're going to take 5 minutes off the clock just to begin, and we're going to strip away a timeout from you. So you can't even stop the clock, and it's already been shortened by 5 minutes. It seems so punitive for a random flip of a coin to the losing team. And by the way, if it was reversed, and if it was the Commanders that lost the coin flip, I'd be saying the same thing today. It's about fairness. That does not seem fair. That's why I'm going to push for Mark Dominik to get on the competition committee and figure out a way to rectify this problem. And one of the few problems the NFL has. That's all I ask, Mark. So I think you've got a handle on a framework of how to solve these issues here from day one, because that is not tenable going forward. All right, when we come back, Mark, here in the GM Shuffle, let's talk about the game of the week as it played out in Minnesota and the game of the week next week here for Week 18 of the NFL season. That's next here on the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We are back on the GM Shuffle. Dave Ross, Mark Dominik here with you, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Mark, let's get to, we talked about it all week on VSiN by the Book, shameless plug, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern time. And Mark, we were talking about hey, this Vikings-Packers game is going to be the game of the week. For a while, it didn't look that way, right? It looked like it was going to be a blowout for Minnesota. They've got a 17-point lead into the fourth quarter. They got a 43-yard field goal attempt to put them up 20. Feels like it's put to bed, and then oink, you get the kick that is missed, and all of a sudden, new life from the Packers. They get back into this thing. Not only do they get back into it, they cut it to 27-25, and they're a third down stop away from getting the ball back potentially to win this game late. What was your takeaway from it? Minnesota holds on, but they look like the better team for the better part of 3.5 quarters.
Yeah, they did. The Vikings certainly played really well 3.5 quarters. The Packers really woke up and kind of got in that groove. 15 unanswered points in the fourth quarter puts you right back in any ball game. And so I think that there's two things. Number one, this has been a tough stretch for the Vikings. They've had to beat a lot of good teams down the road to kind of put themselves in this position. They still got a big one left. But that's really, something to build on. The Vikings feel more and more confident every time they put one of these together. I really like what the Packers were going, what they look like, what they're going to be, and still what they can be. I think the Packers can pull away from this game, say, hey, look, we kind of hiccuped a little bit through the first 3 quarters, and we still almost beat the Vikings. So we can absolutely play with these guys at any time. And so you can pull something from both sides and say there's a positive message here. Sure, would it been nice for the Packers to win for the Green Bay fans? Yes, but would it have changed anything in terms of their outcome? I don't think so. They're still going to probably be the 6th seed. And they're going to sit there and they're going to have to travel somewhere, and we'll get to figure that out, who's it's going to be. But I think in this kind of scenario, it's more important for the Vikings to win that game based off of what they have in front of them, because I think Green Bay, both teams are going to be tough outs in the postseason. I think they're both good football teams. It was nice to see Sam Darnold, career high. What he's been able to do overall with the Vikings has been amazing. And we talked to Rich Gannon earlier today. he had a really interesting statement where he's like, the 3 years that that Sam Darnold's at the Jets, he won 13 games. In one season with the Vikings, he's won 14 games. That's an incredible statement when you think about what that actually means. So it shows you he's really got a lot of confidence in what's going on and what he's doing with that football team. As for the Packers, again, I think the takeaway is we can compete with these guys. We can still catch up anybody. We're still good enough to beat anybody in the NFC. I think they really, truly are good enough to beat anybody in the NFC. So that's what's going to make this NFC playoff run really exciting to watch once we figure out what the seedings are going to be, because we still have a lot of big games to go.
And that's the thing, right? If you go back a year ago, Green Bay caught fire late, kind of like they caught fire again late this year. They go to Dallas, don't I remember it, and just absolutely just blast the Cowboys in front of Jerry, Dan Quinn, his last game as D coordinator. Now he's done a great job with the Commanders a year later. And then they go to San Francisco in a game they could have easily won. If we remember that in the divisional round a year ago. So Packers shouldn't be deterred, although they're 5 losses, 2 to the Lions, 2 to the Vikings, 1 to the Eagles. So these are the big boys in the NFC. They're close with those guys. They're going to have to beat them. Now Minnesota has not only the NFC North to play for next week in Detroit, but the number 1 seed overall. And as we found out from Rich Gannon on Monday on VSiN by the Books, 49 times the team that's had the 1 seed has gone to the Super Bowl. The loser of this game is going to be the 5 seed. The 5 seed has gone to the Super Bowl 3 times. It's quite the gap, 49-3 mark. So not only the pride of winning the division, but history tells us the winner has got a real good shot at going all the way to the Super Bowl. The loser, not so much.
Yeah, the loser's sitting there going, you're telling me there's a chance, right? That's what they're trying to say. When you're the 5 seed, you're like, well, there's still a chance. But the 1 seed, it goes back to exactly this, right? When you're a 5 seed, you've got to go on the road to the 4 seed. And you got to go on the road to the next seed. And then you've got to win 3 road games in the NFC against the best teams in the NFC. That's so hard to do. And let alone the logistics of it all, what that does to your team in terms of travel, where the other team's like rest, home, and so it's just a really hard bridge to cross. And I think that's what we see. And Coach Dungy always used to talk about the importance of seeding and what you could do with it. I know when we won our first Super Bowl, we had a home game. That was really important that we were able to play against the 49ers at home. Then we went out to Philadelphia. Instead of, being a high enough seed where you got that home game was so critical back then. And it still is now. And so that's what makes this number 1 seed so important. And the 5 seed's now stuck probably playing Tampa Bay, which is a good football team. Now, yes. I think the most important story of this whole thing is if you could have told me at the beginning of the season that J.J. McCarthy is going to go down and the Vikings are going to play for the number 1 seed in the NFC Week 18 at the beginning of the season, I'd say you're nuts. There's no way. You're telling me the 49ers, well, they're not going to make the postseason. What? Like, are you, what? Okay, the Cowboys, they must have a good, no, they didn't have a good season at all. They got banged up all year long. The Commanders are going to be a good team. You're like, wait a second, what are we talking about? And the Vikings are going to play for first? No way. No way. And so, Kevin O'Connell deserves a lot, of credit for what he's been able to do with that system, what he's able to do with the guys. So they've made some big moves on the defensive side. I think that Brian Flores has done a very good job as a coordinator. Will he ever get a head coaching job again? I don't know. That's going to be a tough one because he sued the league and it's kind of this messy stuff. But he's absolutely done a very good job with that group. They made some big signings. The Vikings have just been a team from the start to the finish, and they're playing like a team all the way through. So this is going to be a great, epic battle that we get to watch in less than a week to say who is the number 1 seed in the NFC. Because, again, the 5 seed has to go to Tampa, which Tampa has showed us. Besides that dog they let with the Dallas Cowboys, they have been very good down the line here playing strong football.
So Sam Darnold throws for a career-high 377 yards in that victory over the Packers. From a GM perspective, and I know this is going to be dicey for Viking backers out there, we don't know how it's going to turn out against Detroit on Sunday. But, Jared Goff is a reclamation project different from what Sam Darnold is, right? That was a former number 1 overall pick, and Jeff Fisher drafted him. Sean McVay got him to a Super Bowl. Then they dumped him. I mean, if we're being honest, they said, we think we've maxed out with you, Jared Goff, so we're going to go to Matthew Stafford. They win this championship. So that move proved to be fruitful for the Rams. But now he's got a new home in Detroit. Does Sam Darnold have a new long-term home in Minnesota, or is this just a 1-year aberration?
So I don't think it's an aberration. I've said to you, I've said to publicly, I think you got to bring the system with Sam Darnold. I think that's really important, or you keep Sam Darnold in the system. I look at it this way. We give the Atlanta Falcons a lot of grief for drafting Michael Penix and signing Kirk Cousins. At the same point, if they can get you a championship, it's worth it, right? It's worth it. If you sign Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy has to sit the bench for 3 years, but you can win a championship or be in contention every year, I think I'd do that. I think if I can be in this conversation and say, hey, look, we'd like to do Sam maybe a 3-year extension, I think in that realm, I don't think I'm going to get the the Baker Mayfield deal where it's 3 for $100 million, because I think Baker Mayfield's agent's going to be knocking on the Tampa Bay door after the season's over, going, we were nice, but Daniel Jones is making, her cousin's making 40 and we're making 33. We need to re-talk about this. And I have a feeling that's a good conversation, but a real conversation is going to happen. If I'm Sam Darnold, I think he's in the 45 to 50 range, and I think if you are, because the Vikings have a rookie quarterback under contract for 3 years, because it gives you 2 really good quarterbacks. I think you find a way to try to get it done in that 45 to 50 range and keep them within that system. There's going to be competition. There's not enough quarterbacks in this draft class. I think 2 or 3 will go in the first round. You're going to have to find quarterbacks that are on other teams' rosters, the Sam Darnolds, a la Sam Darnolds, a la Kirk Cousins, who still want to play somewhere else or want to play, that you're going to pull off their teams to go fill in some holes where other clubs are looking for. So I think there's a real chance that Sam could stay in Minnesota because I think other clubs are a little nervous. Like they're like, this has been great, but is it just a 1-year wonder, or this the new Sam Darnold? It feels like the new Sam Darnold, but I think that Sam Darnold really needs to play in this Kevin O'Connell, Kyle Shanahan offense.
Mark, twofold question here when you're looking at this quarterback room in the short term now. And I don't know if it's just because he's not looking over his shoulder. He sees Nick Mullins instead of, J.J. McCarthy. Maybe there's no pressure there, so Sam could really be the full Sam Darnold experience this year, and it's been great. Would you consider activating Daniel Jones from the practice squad for the postseason? Because God forbid Sam Darnold went down. Would you rather go to Nick Mullins, or would you rather go to Daniel Jones?
I think that depends. That's a good question. I think that depends on how he's been doing in practice, right? And I know he's running third team and that's scout team, and you're basically pretending you're the other team's quarterback, which, you don't get to be a lot better, but it's the hidden stuff. It's the behind the closed doors where he's working with the quarterback coach, maybe the offensive coordinator, maybe even Kevin O'Connell a little bit, to kind of sense where is Daniel Jones in terms of progression of understanding what we're trying to do, understanding. Don't think it's a mistake. The agent purposely wanted him out of the Giants to put him in this system. I guarantee you there are other teams that would have possibly put Daniel Jones on their practice squad. The agent and Daniel Jones know they need to get in this 49ers system to be able to try to reclaim his career, right? And that's what Sam Darnold's done. So I think you don't have to bring him up. I think if it's looked really good, you could bring him up in that kind of situation. The bigger thing is, can you sign him for the offseason? And I think they'll get Daniel Jones to sign back in the offseason, and they'll see that, because I think, again, Daniel Jones is looking at it's not as what's going to happen in 2025. He's trying to figure out 2027. And so if you can get in the system, have a good preseason tape and things like that, you might be traded, or you might be able to, show what's happened here. So I don't see Daniel Jones dressing, but it doesn't mean that Daniel Jones hasn't figured it out. This is all about long-term planning for both clubs. But I wouldn't put, because Daniel Jones is there, Sam Darnold won't be back. Daniel Jones is the third quarterback on this roster and would be regardless if they were 100% healthy. It's just a matter of, does Daniel Jones want to stay in the system, or does somebody else want to play with Daniel Jones, outside of the organization? That's all going to kind of be part of that roulette that we see, or that entire game, the shell game we see when coaches start to move around, bring coordinators with them from somewhere else. That might be where you see where Daniel Jones might be a little more patient to say, wait, before I sign back, I want to see how this thing plays out.
Yeah, it's fascinating because if you project to next year with a healthy J.J. McCarthy, I couldn't see a quarterback room with Sam Darnold, J.J. McCarthy, and Daniel Jones. That's a lot of talent in a quarterback. That's a lot of first-round talent, right? We're talking top 10 picks, all those guys in the same quarterback room. That's a lot of quarterback capital potentially for a GM like yourself to delve out, right? Could you use very quickly one of those guys as trade bait?
Yeah, I think you could, and it would be Daniel Jones. You're not going to want to get rid of JJ, and you're not going to find Sam Darnold. So it's really about Daniel Jones. It's a matter of, does Daniel Jones want to stay in this system and understand it, learn it, to see if he can have what the Sam Darnold effect is happening right now.
Well, a really good problem to have with quarterback room right now. It's really strong, potentially for Minnesota for years to come. All right, Mark, when we come back, a team I got to ask you back from a GM's perspective, what's happening for the shoe that's next here on the GM Shuffle?
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We continue the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross, Mark Dominik here with you. Mark, let's talk about the Colts. They have been officially eliminated from playoff contention with a disastrous 45. They give up 45 points to Drew Lock, 5 total touchdowns for Drew in this win in the Meadowlands. So, good win for the G-Men, I guess, but a terrible loss, conversely, for the Colts. Mark, as a GM, when you look at Gus Bradley, you look at Shane Steichen, you look at Anthony Richardson, what do you do there? Where do we begin with the autopsy of the Colts?
Yeah, that game was kind of a lose-lose for everybody, honestly. I mean, yeah, great. Drew Lock had the victory. The Giants just surrendered the number one pick in the draft now to the New England Patriots. So they lose the number one pick in the draft. Giants fans dismay. And then you got the Colts, who just gave up 45 points to a team that basically couldn't find their way out of a bag a week ago. And so now it's like suddenly, boom, 45 points puts Gus Bradley in a bad spot. I've worked with Gus for many years in Tampa Bay, obviously the former head coach at the Jaguars. He's been around the National Football League for a long time. They just could not answer anything that Malik Nabers was dealing. I mean, they did not have an answer for Malik at all. The tackling was bad across the board. They didn't look very fast on defense. It was a frustrating game across just in all phases. Start with Richardson. I think you're going to have some type of competition with him next year. That's not Joe Flacco. That's just Joe's pushing through. You need another quarterback in there that's going to push Richardson because he's not been able to stay healthy, and that's something he dealt with in college. It's something he's dealing with in the NFL, and he tapped himself out of a football game. Don't forget that. You can't forget that he said, I'm too tired to go in the goal line situation. I've never seen that before, ever. And so those things make me say, if Chris Ballard holds on, which I assume he will, as the GM, what else can I do at this quarterback room to make it more competitive than what it is today? And so I don't have to rely on Richardson, even though I just drafted him number 5 overall recently. For Shane Steichen, I want answers. I just need to understand what did happen on defense. I want to understand what happened with the season. I want to see what he does against the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. Their team's out of it. The Jaguars have been out of it since week 9, week 10. Jacksonville's still trying to compete from here to there. But do we go lay an egg in Jacksonville? Is going to tell me a lot about him as a coach. And can he really get these guys going? Because there were so many negative stories coming out of the Colts all season long. Guys missing treatment, guys missing meetings or being late to things. Like I talked about with, just things that you don't expect an NFL team to do has happened at the Colts. So I want to see if he can rally a team that hasn't won, has nothing to play for. Can they go out there and play the way they should play as a football team? That's going to be important in terms of the long-term decision of what's going to go on here. And then you got to decide if you are Chris Ballard and you're the GM, what is the greener pasture? Who is the coach that I want to have? And why is it that's the coach? Because I need to go to the ownership and say, look, I do think we should make a change. And here's the 3 or 4 coaches I really think we should consider. You've got to already have that put together. Even if you're not going to make a decision, you should have that in your drawer, pull it out and say, yep, there's my 6 guys that I like. That's an interesting list as well, because it depends on who that's on that list. Is that going to make us better than what Shane's done with this team? We have to figure that out. So again, a lot goes, this is not a snap decision. I know they lost a bad game. It doesn't mean I'm turning around and go fire the head coach right away. I want to get through this next game. I want to see how the team responds. And then I'm going to look with my my owner and say, here are the coaches that are the hottest coaches. Here's what I think this team needs. And here's how we're going to fix this team. It's tough. Shane's done a decent job. It's been a frustrating year for Colts fans, clearly. But, you take 2 years and you've got a chance at 2 winning seasons and being, close to the postseason. The grass sometimes isn't greener, and hiring a new coach means everything's changed. Everything. And do you want that, or you just want to kind of maybe change the defensive side of the ball?
Yeah, it feels like he's not really in the hot seat, but I love the way you phrased it, Mark. I just need the answers. I need the right answers. Like we're not there yet, but if you give me the right answers, we'll be good. But give me the wrong answers, then we might have to start looking in a different direction. I wonder if the same is true with Zach Taylor. I know they won 30-24 overtime, wild finish there against Denver. They still have fate, playoff hopes. They are kept alive. They'd have to beat Pittsburgh. They'd need a Miami loss, which they're going to play the Jets. They'd also need a Bronco loss. They're 9-point favorites at home against the Chiefs because no Patrick Mahomes is what we're presuming there. does it come down to that if you're management looking at Zach Taylor and saying, how can it's your offense. So it's a really good offense. It's a historic offense, but it could be one of those historic situations that you don't want where we're breaking all these records and yet somehow we're missing the postseason. How does that counterbalance go if you're looking bigger picture at Zach Taylor?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine firing Zach Taylor at all. I think he's the head coach there. Bengals are notoriously more conservative as an organization when you look into how they handle contract negotiations, how they handle people. They're not a big change organization. They make you play things. I mean, look at T. Higgins or Jamar Chase. They're not getting deals, right? They had to play all the way through. Because they were so historically good, it would be hard for me to sit there and go, why would I fire the guy that's run it down? I look at the other side of the ball, and I don't blame Lou Lamoriello, the defensive coordinator. I think of this, and Dax Hill went down with an injury, right? Lost him for the season. DJ Turner was in there, but he went down for the season. Cam Taylor-Britt was in this real weird funk. He was starting out as DB1, got benched once, got benched twice, now found his rhythm. He's been really good this last month. He's been back to DB1. But their secondary has gone through a lot of troubles and tribulations where it's been like really hard and really frustrating, where they've given up points and lost games where you just say, that's not, to me, the head coach's fault. That's mistakes mentally that are on the defensive side. So because they've scored so many points on offense, because of who they are as a unit, I'm keeping everything the same if I'm the Bengals. Do I think they can win this weekend? Of course I think they can win. Do I think they can get help from both the Dolphins and the Broncos? It seems almost impossible. They're going to be picking that dreaded spot, right, Dave? They're going to be picking 18, 19, or 20. That means you didn't make the postseason, but you really had a good season. I've picked that spot before. It's not fun. I mean, it's good, but it's not great. And so, that's the dreaded spot to pick in, but that's where the Bengals seem like they're going to end up. But in the same realm, that's going to be a nice player they're going to put on that team, and they'll get some of these players back from IR that were on the secondary that I think is really going to make this team even better. I think this team's a complete rebound team. I'll bet you their win total next year is 11 or more. And I think you'll see pretty much the whole thing stay back together.
And that's interesting from a GM perspective too, Mark, is that you're already looking at that middle of the pack first round draft pick. And we saw it, right? Like, I think the layman's going to go, I don't care how many picks you draft all defense, right? Just draft all defense, fix the defense. Offense is great. They still have offensive line problems, right? So where you're picking in that first round, would you look offensive for short term without knowing any? Because we'll have months to scout guys, but if the right guy is there at offensive line, would you consider that with your first round pick, or does it have to be the obvious? I got to look defense and improve that side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I think the offensive line is still going to be good. It's not as good as last year's offensive line, the way it's starting to stack up already. As you said, we'll dive deeper into that as we go, but it's not as quite as talented an offensive line class, I think, as we saw last year, especially at the tackle position. But it's still good, and I still think you absolutely keep that in the forefront of your brain when you look at it. You also can still look at wide receiver. T. Higgins more than likely is gone, and so that's a big piece of what their offense is. Clearly, I mean, 3 touchdowns. What it was last night, or so it was a couple days ago. So he's a huge part of the system, and if he's not there, that's an easy plug and play. Let's just keep scoring, and maybe we'll get better on defense. But I think the edge and pass rusher is a pretty good class this year going into the draft. More that 3-4 outside linebacker type of edge rusher. There's quite a few of those guys. So I think you're going to have all 3 of those positions: offensive line, wide receiver, and edge rusher are going to be clearly the spots I think you're going to want to put the draft pick. Again, I think the secondary is going to be better because they're getting everybody back healthy. It's going to make for great competition. Newton, their 4th-round pick, he came in and he's played pretty good from this year at corner also. So that gives them 4 or 5 corners, which is rare in the NFL to have that many guys you think can go out there and be, on the field. So I think they'll be better. I think you're going to see those 3 positions, but I think that's going to keep everything the same. Really, the big question is, can they pay 2 receivers? I don't think so, but hopefully for T. Higgins, he hits the market because he's going to really set that market on fire, as we all knew he would. And it's a shame that they have all these players together, and yet their postseason run looks like it might be at an end.
When we look at it, and obviously that when they took Jamar Chase and they passed on Penei Sewell, I know Detroit's like great. He's become, framework of their offensive line in Detroit. Jamar's worked out as well. So it's not like one pick was, I'd say, better than the other. They both worked for their teams, that's for sure. But you go back to this year's draft, and we've got all those talented quarterbacks, and they are talented and this rookie class is shining. But I think the Chargers are going, man, we're pretty happy with Joe Alt, right? Like, it's I don't know how many Joe Alts are out there that you can find, but even though it's not the sexier pick on draft day, that kind of really changed what the Chargers could do, and now they find themselves in the postseason, right? So as a GM at that draft spot and in that draft capital, it's so important to get that right no matter what the position is. Offensive line, wide receiver, certainly quarterback, but you just can't miss on those first-round picks, right?
You can't, and you hope you don't, and yet no one thinks they will, but every year we see that fifth-year option on about 10 to 15 guys not get exercised because it just didn't work out. I was hard on the Chargers. I was hard on the Titans at 5 and 6 for not taking Brock Bowers. I was huge, and Brock Bowers has turned out to be everything I thought he was going to be.
Yeah.
But you can go back and listen to any kind of Sirius XM, any kind of television podcast, anything like that. I was Brock Bowers all the way through. I thought Brock Bowers for Justin Herbert would be a marriage made in heaven. I thought for Will Levis it would be really important for him to have a guy that's so uniquely talented. But, Alt has been a great player, and he's a great worker and a great teammate and all those things. And it's allowed them to have a little bit more flexibility in their offensive line than they've had before. So it's one of those ones where, protecting the quarterback to me is critical. You got to find the quarterback, protect the quarterback. So I understand it. I just thought Brock Bowers was generational type of a tight end where it's like, this guy's way different than Kyle Pitts. If you talk to anybody that's in the SEC or any coach in the SEC, they're like, we don't know how to handle this guy. The other guy they couldn't handle in the SEC, Jaden Daniels. Like, no one knew how to deal with him, right? And so when you're talking about guys like that level, I like an offensive line as much as anybody. I paid for my offensive line when I was GM of the Bucs. Like, I was not going to let guys go. That's too important to me. But when you have generational type of position, I think that's unique. And I wonder where the Chargers could be if they had Brock Bowers and maybe, Jamari Sawyer still played well enough this year at tackle that they could get by.
I'll tell you this, GM Mark Dominik did not miss on those picks because Brock Bowers is exactly what you said he would be and more. Jaden Daniels is exactly what you had said he would be and more. So if you had either one of those picks, Mark, he would be pretty darn happy with your selection, that's for sure. Fascinating how all those dominoes, as we said, no matter Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase, you can make the arguments. Both those teams got it right. And you certainly would have had it right with Brock Bowers, whether that was Tennessee, whether the Chargers, or beyond. You just can't miss. Those certainly would not have been misses by any stretch of the imagination. All right, let's come back with our crowning moment next here on the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We continue the GM Shuffle presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross, Mark Dominik here with you. And Mark, congratulations to the LA Rams. They have won the NFC West by virtue of their win over Arizona and by the Commanders' win Sunday night over Atlanta. Strength of victory. It's deep in the weeds in the tiebreakers, but they've got it. They secure it. So no matter what happens against Seattle, they've already locked up the NFC West. But, Mark, the interesting thing here is they haven't wrapped up yet the 3 seed. They would need to win next week against Seattle. That would get them the 3 seed. If they lose to Seattle and the Buccaneers beat the Saints, the Bucs would get the 3 seed, and the Rams would then get the dreaded 4, which would make you play the loser of the Vikings and Lions game on Sunday Night Football. So you don't want that 4 spot. How important is it now for Sean McVay to go out there and go, boys, job 1 is taken care of, but job 2 is still on the table?
Yeah, it's not like it's a bad Seattle team, right? I mean, Seattle has, the chance to compete, but obviously they saw everything fall apart, where they were hoping that the Commanders would lose last night. They could play for the NFC West is wide open. Instead, now officially Seattle's eliminated. The difference here is obviously the Rams have one more win than Tampa Bay, but they're 6-5 in the division, where Tampa Bay is 7-4. So if Tampa beats New Orleans, they'll be 8-4. Where the Rams, if they lose, will be 6-6. So although they're tied, they'd both be tied with the same amount of wins. It's 8-4. The conference record takes you over the top, and that's where Tampa becomes the number 3 seed, and the Rams to number 4. The Rams also can hold on to the 3 seed if Tampa just loses, and Atlanta wins and Atlanta goes. It doesn't really matter, right? So it's a big thing with the Rams win. Obviously, they lock in the 3 seed. If the Rams lose, they have to hope the Bucs lose to be able to hold that 3 seed, or they'll get the 4 seed. So still a lot to be played for when you think about what you said, Dave. It's like Your consolation prize is the 4 seed. You get to play Detroit or Minnesota. Congratulations. 5 seed, that's still up for debate whether that's the Commanders or that could be the Green Bay Packers, depending on other things too. So you definitely would love to be that 3 seed. I don't think anybody really wants to play the loser of the Detroit-Minnesota game.
We saw it last year in the postseason. We saw it week 1 in the regular season as well, where you get the Stafford Goff Bowl, right? And so far, the new Goff has gotten the better of Stafford, although Stafford has the championship, of course, his first year in there in LA. If we got that matchup again a third time, if the Rams did slide to that 4 spot and then Detroit lost to Minnesota, we could have that matchup again for one more time. When you look back on that deal as a GM, do you give an advantage to LA just because they won the championship? Or do you say, well, let's see, because if Detroit wins one, I'd be very curious to see how history would look at that trade, essentially Goff for Stafford.
Yeah, you know what? I think hardware has to win the deal. And when you win a Super Bowl ring, that has to be. As much as Goff looks like he still could play 10 more years and hopefully can for Detroit, and Stafford may play 1 or 2. I mean, that's where I think Stafford is in his career. Like, I think he's at the twilight. I don't see him playing into his late 40s or mid 40s or anything Tom Brady-esque or anything like that. So, the hardware's there, everything. So as much as I think the trade was tremendously strong and forward thinking by Brad Holmes, Detroit's GM, who was with the Rams, was their director of pro, he saw what he thought Jared Goff could become, and Jared Goff obviously flashed enough to get them that team. I give the Rams the edge. I just think that Detroit was opportunistic in terms of making something happen with Jared Goff and being part of that whole bringing him in. If the Detroit Lions find magic, which would be just amazing when you look at their postseason history of what ineptitude and sadness. And if they could find a Super Bowl, then automatically the crown switches and Jared Goff becomes the winner of the trade. Because again, I think longevity's there. If you got a team that's kind of put all together, where I think the Rams are going to have to switch out the quarterback spot in a year or two and start that thing, even though they kind of rebuilt the roster, they still need the guy that's pulling the trigger. It's going to be a much more difficult road to hoe possibly. So until Detroit wins, I give the edge to the Rams. But man, Jared Goff has been a great addition to Detroit and what they've been able to accomplish.
And both those games, by the way, the Rams got to look back and go, how did we lose those games? One in the postseason, one in week 1 in overtime in the regular season this year. They had command of those games until they didn't. I'm rooting for that third time. I'd like to see it a third time if it comes to fruition. Let's get to our crowning moment here, presented by DraftKings. And again, a lot to choose from on a very busy week 17. But Mark, what stood out to you as the crowning moment?
Yeah, Dave, this was hard because there was a lot of great performances. I mean, we saw Lamar Jackson just roll. We saw Josh Allen get on fire and use Amari Cooper, got to the end zone. I mean, there were some great running performances. I mean, Jaden Daniels, what he did last night to secure Washington and win the game in overtime, and how effective he was running the ball as well as passing. But to me, the crowning moment is the guy that's not going to be the MVP and still do something only 9 other players have ever done, and that's rush for 2,000 yards in the National Football League. It's Saquon Barkley.
Wow.
What he has done this year, based off of becoming a free agent, going to the rival Eagles, where, we see the Giants that they're saying, as long as he doesn't play for the Eagles, and then he turns and rips 2,000 yards on the ground, 2,005, and still has a game left if he wanted to play or if they decide to play him. To me, that's the crowning moment. Like, when you could do something so unique that 10 players or less have ever done in the league at that position, and especially that he had to do it and switch teams, I think that's an amazing thing. So easily my hat's off. The crowning moment, Saquon Barkley of the Eagles.
It's amazing, right? You can't pay running backs, not second deals, right? You can't pay Saquon, you can't pay a Derrick Henry, can't pay a Josh Jacobs, right? We're seeing all these guys, Mark, go around the league. Do GMs now have to rethink that moniker of we're not going to pay quote unquote aging running backs that have already had their legs used up? I don't know when the renaissance happened, but it feels like we're seeing that renaissance here for new teams for running backs.
Yeah, I mean, I look at James Cook and say, how important is he for the Buffalo Bills? And could you imagine losing him because you're like, well, we'll just replace him. Sometimes it's not that easy. I know in San Francisco, it seems like it's like pick anybody, they run behind the 49ers, system. Those guys are good players. I mean, yes, they've found players through the years, but they've done a good job of finding players. But I still think when you know that one of the players is going to touch the ball at least 20 to 25 times a game, what other position does that besides quarterback? No one else does that. No one does. The receivers don't touch the ball 20 to 25 times a game. Tight ends, often, maybe the center, right? The center touches the ball every play. And the quarterback the other way. But that means it's the third most touches or the second really most touches on a football team. And I think the way the salary cap's moved, the Aaron Joneses, we'll talk about another guy that's gone to another team and production. I think you got to relook at this. And I think you got to sit there and say, maybe we're being too harsh on that position. I know I've got to balance a team out because I got to pay a quarterback, maybe a left tackle or wide receiver or defensive end. But if we are truly honest with ourselves and we look at the impact the Raiders have without Jacobs, or you look at the impact of the Giants without Saquon Barkley, or you look at, when you start to look at the impact, what happened to you when you decided to move away from a running back and where you sit now currently, I think that says, hey, look, let's relook at this market. Let's be that at the forefront. Maybe it's $15 million a year. But when the cap's going to jump another $10, $12, $14 million, maybe we got to find a way to get that guy back involved in terms of where we're going to spend money. Maybe we don't spend as much money on the right guard in the center. Maybe that's the two spots we take a little bit away from. I think, and I've said this for a while, I think it's wide receiver 2. I think it's extremely overpriced wide receiver 2. I would much rather have running back 1 than WR2. And I'd be willing to, because they're getting paid about the same amount of money, but I'd rather have running back 1. And here's why. Every year, there's a lot more wide receivers that come in this league that have production than there are running backs. And every year, if there's one thing you feel like you can kind of replace, it's the wide receiver. And it might not be in the first round. It might be in the third round or the fourth round or fifth round, but they're there. And so why clubs are still paying wide receiver 2 and 3 premium numbers doesn't make sense when you're not paying wide receiver or running back 1 that kind of number. I think there's going to be a shift, or if I was a GM, I would make that shift. I would sit there and say, hey, look, we're going to draft wide receiver 2s and 3s. When we get wide receiver 1, we're going to sign that guy. I'll be fired up.
Yep.
We got neighbors, we face whoever it is. I want that guy. But we're going to get wide receiver 2 and 3 are going to have to be on a revolutionary. The Ravens are kind of like that. The Ravens have been a team that just keep drafting receivers, don't really pay it. I think they've got one now, and Zay Flowers are going to want to pay. But I think that's the right way to look at that position. And I'm surprised as you see the Ravens, they go sign Derrick Henry and look at the impact it's been for them.
I think when Mark Dominik's phone goes off and an owner calls him, you're going to give that spiel to that owner. I think it's a great way to phrase it. I'd rather pay the running back 1 versus paying wide receiver 2. Very astute. But Saquon Barkley, 2,003 yards. That is the crowning moment this week, is presented by DraftKings. The crown is Saquon Barkley's for this week. Let's get to Monday night, because Detroit's 3.5-point favorites, total 50.5 rather, against San Francisco tonight. Nothing to play for either team. Mark, you and I talked about it on By the Books this morning, and it's fascinating. How does Dan Campbell tone down Dan Campbell and the willingness to win a game that doesn't mean anything, and then you got everything on the line 6 nights later against Minnesota?
That's hard. I mean, I really would fight Coach Campbell on this, because I just feel like short week, huge game next week. And I know it's tough, right? As a head coach, you're like, the guy that has to dress and play is like, oh, he doesn't think I'm as good as the guy that didn't have to dress. I'm going to put him on the bench, right? That's a very tricky line to walk in a locker room as a head coach, is like, well, you're going to play, you're not. It's like, dang, okay, I know where I sit in the totem pole. I didn't think I was sitting there, but that's where I sit today. That's just life. And sometimes you have to suck it up. I see this situation as they do have nothing to play for. I know it's not in Dan Campbell's mantra, but Hutchinson's not there, and Aleem McNeil's not there. Carlton Davis isn't there. Montgomery's not there. I mean, we've got so many guys that aren't there that are part of this team, and if another one of those names pops off the list, I just think when it comes down to the NFC Championship game, you're not going to be there either. And that's the biggest concern, is that this is about winning a championship, not about winning week 17 of a meaningless game. And I got to keep stressing that to the coach and say, this may not be your mindset, but this needs to be our mindset. And you can still talk to the team about trying to win the game. Like, we're not going to San Francisco to lose the game. I believe in these guys on this roster, and these guys are going to play, and we can still go out there and beat this team. But understand, our goal is a big one. And our goal is, as he has said, our goal is to play 4 games in the postseason, maybe 3, probably 4, and to win them all, not to beat the 49ers.
Very quickly, as we wrap this up for the Niners, nothing to play for, obviously. Does Brock Purdy still have anything to prove, or has that point's been made already?
I think he's got something to prove. I think he just wants to sit there and say, this team will still respond to me. I mean, obviously, now that he's got 3 years under his belt, he can get his extension. I think you can come out here and play well against the Detroit team and kind of finish the season on a high. I think it makes it easier for John Lynch to go ahead and find that extension in that $45 to $50 million range. Again, I'm just not a Brock Purdy guy that's going to be 55 to 60. I'd tell him to wait and see another year based off of what just happened this year.
Mark, always appreciate the time. Great conversations here in the GM Shuffle. So we'll do it again later on this week.
Sounds good, Dave. Enjoy the game.
There he is, everybody. Mark Dominik, our GM here at VSiN. Thanks for listening to the GM Shuffle presented by DraftKings and VSiN.